All her childhood, she lived under the shadow of a wrongful conviction, her father locked behind bars for a crime he never committed. As a black woman, she had to endure every doubtful glance, every cruel whisper. She worked twice as hard, fought 3 times as much, all just to prove she was worthy. And then, on the very night she was at her weakest, the alcohol made her legs give way. The rain poured without mercy. The roar of traffic mixed with the pounding of her heart. The man who appeared and carried her away was none other than the son of the man who had destroyed her family, Carson Boyd, a young billionaire, powerful, cold. Yet in his eyes there was something that made her heart tremble. Was this humiliation, or the beginning of a tragic love? Stay with this story, because sometimes the secrets hidden in the dark can change an entire life. And if you have ever believed that justice and love are worth fighting for, don't look away. The first light of morning spilled across polished glass. Taraji opened her eyes to a ceiling she did not know. Her head throbbed. Silk sheets pressed against her skin. She sat up quickly and realized the truth. This was not her home. Shame burned in her chest. She remembered the rain, the cold air, strong arms lifting her body, and then darkness. Taraji pushed the blanket away and steadied her breath. She was not a stranger to humiliation. She had been underestimated her entire life. Still, she had carved her place as a creative director in one of the most ruthless industries in the country. Every project, every campaign, every late night was proof of her worth. Her eyes moved across the room. A quiet hum came from the hallway. That was when she saw Carson Boyd. Tall, sharp suit, an expression carved from ice. He carried the weight of billions. But his eyes told another story, a struggle hidden behind power. The shame inside her shifted to anger, then confusion. She hated him for who his father was. She hated herself for noticing the quiet storm in his gaze. Was this the beginning, or the end? Carson stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. His words were short. His voice was hard. He hung up without notice. Taraji studied him in silence. He seemed untouchable. But beneath that perfect posture was a man chained by blood. James Boyd, his father, ruled their empire with iron fists. Ruthless in business, cold in family. He demanded obedience, and Carson had given it for years. Every contract, every public move was approved by him. Carson had the wealth of nations at his fingertips, yet he could not control his own life. Victoria, his grandmother, was the only other force in the family, old yet sharp. She watched the empire like a hawk, silent but calculating. Carson respected her, but even she would not shield him if he defied his father. For the first time, Taraji saw the prison behind the glass, the money, the power, the legacy. None of it was freedom. Carson turned, his eyes catching hers. He did not smile. He did not speak. Yet the silence between them carried more than words. 2 worlds stood in one room, the woman scarred by injustice and the man shackled by privilege. Later that morning, the conference room echoed with quiet tension. Polished wood stretched across the table. Colleagues shuffled papers, yet every eye stole glances at Carson and Taraji. She sat upright, her chin high, her pride sharper than any blade. He entered with steady steps, shoulders squared. When their gazes locked, time slowed. For Taraji, it was hatred. Hatred for the name he carried, for the pain his family had caused hers. But hatred was never pure. Underneath, there was a dangerous pull. For Carson, it was curiosity. This woman did not lower her eyes like the others. She met his stare without flinching. A challenge, a warning, a spark. The meeting moved on. Voices rose and fell, strategies discussed, numbers quoted. Yet for them, every word was background noise. It was not the business on paper that mattered, but the war of emotions across the table. Her lips pressed tight, holding back words she could not say. His hand tapped the pen, a rhythm betraying the storm inside him. By the end, nothing was resolved, except one truth. They could not ignore each other. Not here, not ever again. Days blurred into one another. Projects, deadlines, late nights. Taraji buried herself in work. Carson moved through the office like a shadow. Yet no matter how hard she tried to avoid him, he was there. A glance in the elevator, a brief brush of hands when passing documents. Small, unplanned collisions that left her pulse racing. Each moment was ordinary to others, but to them it carried a weight too heavy to name. She told herself it was nothing, just nerves, just stress. But the truth whispered louder each day. The shame of feeling drawn to him warred with the memory of her father's prison bars. One evening, as the office emptied, Carson approached. His voice was low, careful. "You don't have to fight alone." Her breath caught. She turned away, refusing to answer, because to admit anything would be betrayal, to her father, to herself. Still, when he walked past, the air seemed to follow him. The silence left behind was louder than words. The flame was small, hidden, dangerous. But fire, once lit, never stays quiet for long. The sound of heels echoed against marble. The room stilled. Phoenix Monroe entered like she owned the ground beneath her, every step deliberate, every glance sharp. She carried the title of Carson's fiancée, though everyone knew it was a deal forged by money and bloodline. Her eyes swept the table, then stopped on Taraji. A slow smile curved her lips, not of warmth, but of disdain. "So, this is the woman they call talented?" Phoenix said, her voice sweet and cruel all at once. "Interesting. I suppose ambition can take anyone far, even without pedigree." Laughter rippled from a few corners. Heat rushed to Taraji's face, but she did not bow her head. She had faced worse before. Still, the sting of class and color cut deep, sharper than any blade. Phoenix leaned closer, lowering her voice but not her malice. "Don't mistake this world for yours. You're only here until we decide otherwise." The silence afterward was heavy. Taraji clenched her fists beneath the table, nails digging into skin. It was humiliation in front of everyone. A reminder that in this empire, she was still seen as an outsider. Taraji walked out of the meeting room, the sound of laughter still in her ears. The corridor stretched long and empty, yet her chest felt crowded with shadows. She closed her eyes, and the past forced its way forward. She was 12 again, standing in a cold courtroom, her father's wrists bound in iron cuffs, the sound of the judge declaring a sentence that would steal years from his life. People whispered around them, shaking their heads. Some called him a criminal, others said nothing at all. Her mother wept, her hands trembling. Taraji had stood still, frozen, while the world branded her family with shame. That moment had never left her. It followed her into every classroom, every interview, every boardroom. The image of her father's tired eyes burned brighter now. She carried his pain in silence, transforming it into ambition, into fire. Yet here she was again, mocked and diminished as though her worth would never be enough. A tear slid down her cheek before she wiped it away quickly. She hated weakness. She hated remembering. But the memory reminded her of the promise she had made long ago. She would never allow them to break her again. That evening, another gathering. Glasses clinked. Voices rose in shallow laughter. Phoenix moved through the crowd like a queen, her words sharp enough to cut. She circled Taraji once more, her taunts coated in sugar but laced with poison. Taraji held her ground, though her stomach twisted. The humiliation from earlier still burned. But then, before Phoenix could strike again, Carson stepped forward. His voice sliced through the noise. "Enough." The word was low, calm, but it carried power. The room stilled. Phoenix blinked in surprise, her smile faltering for the first time. "She works harder than anyone here," Carson continued. "If you can't respect that, you don't belong in this discussion." Gasps followed. The statement was bold, unprecedented. Taraji's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever defended her so openly, especially not him. Phoenix's face tightened, rage flashing in her eyes, but she said nothing more. She turned, heels striking the floor with sharp defiance as she walked away. Taraji stood frozen, her chest heavy. Shame had turned into something else, confusion, gratitude, a dangerous warmth spreading where only anger had lived before. For the first time she wondered if his silence held more than coldness. The defense had consequences. Behind closed doors, James Boyd's voice thundered. His hand slammed against the desk. Carson stood still, silent, but his jaw tightened. "She does not belong here," James declared. "This company, this family, is not a place for charity projects. Remove her." Carson's silence was dangerous, but it was not agreement. His father misread it as obedience. Elsewhere, whispers spread through the boardroom. Executives questioned Taraji's position. Some doubted her loyalty. Others feared her influence over Carson. Every hallway felt colder, every conversation shorter. Taraji noticed the shift. Files went missing. Invitations disappeared from her inbox. People who once smiled now avoided her gaze. It was not subtle. It was war dressed in professionalism. Victoria watched from a distance. Her eyes revealed nothing, yet she saw everything. She measured Taraji in silence, as if weighing her against the empire itself. Taraji braced herself. She had fought her way into this industry. She would fight again. But deep inside, she knew this was no ordinary battle. This was the Boyd Empire, and they played with stakes higher than careers. They played with lives. It started with a headline, then another. Soon, every news channel, every gossip site carried the story. Billionaire heir and his employee, secret affair? Carson Boyd betrays fiancé for a corporate climber? The words hit harder than fists. Taraji's phone lit up with messages. Some mocked, some accused, some were cruel beyond measure. At the office, whispers followed her steps. Coworkers stared too long, their smiles thin and false. Social media tore her apart, questioning her morals, her worth, even her right to be where she was. Taraji locked herself in her office, staring at the screen. Each headline dragged her back to that courtroom, to the shame that had stained her family. Once again, she was the center of judgment. Once again, her dignity was on trial. She buried her face in her hands. The pressure was suffocating. This was not just gossip, it was a storm designed to destroy her. Outside her door, she heard voices. Some laughed. Some whispered her name. For all her strength, for all her pride, Taraji felt the weight pressing down. Alone. Exposed. The world against her, and for the first time in years, she wondered if she could survive it. The storm outside raged as if echoing the one within. Taraji sat alone, her office lights dim. She tried to bury herself in work, but her hands trembled over the keyboard. Then a soft knock broke the silence. Carson entered without waiting. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was thick, heavy with all they had not said. Taraji turned away, her voice low. "You should not be here." Carson stepped closer. "And yet, I am." Her resolve cracked. All the humiliation, all the whispers, all the weight she carried poured into her chest. He reached for her hand. She should have pulled away. She did not. His lips found hers, and the world fell silent. There was no empire, no scandal, no judgment, only heat, only hunger, only release. Years of restraint burned away in a single kiss. Taraji hated herself for surrendering. She hated him for making her want this. But in that moment she could not stop. Their walls collapsed. Their hearts, once chained, beat wild and free. It was forbidden. Dangerous. Yet nothing had ever felt more real. The morning after carried no softness. Taraji stepped into the boardroom, her pulse steadying, when the door shut behind her. James Boyd stood waiting. His presence filled the space like a storm cloud. He studied her with eyes sharp as steel. "You think you've won, my son?" His voice was low, but every word cut deep. "Do you know what happens to people who cross this family?" Taraji held her ground, though her knees weakened. She had faced cruelty before, but never from a man who held the power to erase her life. James moved closer, lowering his tone. "You are nothing but a distraction, a stain, and I will make sure the world sees you as such." The air felt thin. She clenched her fists, refusing to let fear show. Yet inside, terror coiled. She thought of her father, of prison bars closing tight. She thought of her own name dragged through dirt. James leaned back at last, a smirk on his lips. "Walk away, or I will destroy you." When he left, silence echoed louder than his threat. Taraji's chest heaved. She had never been more certain that this fight was not only about love, it was survival. That night, unable to sleep, Taraji searched through old archives for a campaign report. Papers scattered across her desk, but something caught her eye. A file marked with her father's trial year. Her breath caught. Hands trembling, she pulled it closer. Inside were transcripts, financial ledgers, names she recognized from the Boyd Empire. The more she read, the colder her blood ran. It was all there. Deals struck behind closed doors. Evidence hidden. Witnesses bought. It was not chance that had ruined her father. It had been design. Tears blurred the pages. She pressed her palms against them as if holding the truth down, afraid it would vanish. For years, she had carried shame that was never hers. For years, she believed her family cursed. Now she saw the curse had a name. Boyd. The room spun. Her heart pounded. Questions burned. Did Carson know? Was he another pawn, or was he complicit? She closed the file, chest heaving. The truth was a weapon, but it was also fire. To wield it meant war. Taraji stared into the dark. She had asked for justice all her life. Tonight, she touched it with trembling hands. The next day, the world shifted again. Phoenix arrived at the Boyd estate with a smile that chilled the air. She carried a hand pressed gently to her stomach. Her voice was soft, but her words detonated. "I'm pregnant." The room froze. Carson stared, stunned. James Boyd's lips curled into triumph. Whispers spread like wildfire. Taraji felt the ground slip beneath her. Pregnant. The word echoed in her head, sharp and merciless. Phoenix's eyes met hers with cold victory. The message was clear. You cannot win. Carson demanded proof, but Phoenix was ready. Doctor's notes, test results, papers slid across the table with a manicured hand. Whether truth or lie, it did not matter. The damage was done. Taraji's chest constricted. Betrayal mixed with heartbreak until she could hardly breathe. She turned before tears could fall, before her voice could break. Carson called after her, but she did not stop. The echo of her footsteps was louder than his words. The Empire had chosen its pawn. Phoenix smiled as though the crown was already hers. And Taraji. She vanished into the night, pride her only shield against the wound inside her. Rain fell heavy, soaking through her coat, her hair clinging to her face. Taraji walked with no destination, only away. Away from lies, away from betrayal, away from the empire that had stolen her father and now sought to steal her soul. Her heels struck against pavement, echoing in empty streets. Each step was heavy, yet she would not stop. Pride pushed her forward even as her heart broke in silence. She thought of Carson, his hand in hers, the warmth she had felt, the kiss that had felt like truth. She thought of Phoenix's words, the smirk of victory, the cruel ease with which she claimed his future. Tears mixed with rain, hidden from the world. She refused to collapse, refused to let anyone see her fall. Yet inside, she was shattering. Every drop of water on her skin felt like judgment. Every clap of thunder a reminder that the world was not made for her kind of love. At last, she stopped beneath a street lamp, light trembling against the storm. She lifted her face to the sky, her chest rising and falling. She would walk away with dignity, even if it meant leaving her heart behind. The rain had barely dried from Taraji's coat when she heard the knock. It was late, far past the hour for visitors. She opened the door slowly, her breath sharp. Victoria Boyd stood there, not frail, not gentle, but tall, wrapped in grace and silence that carried weight heavier than gold. "May I come in?" the older woman asked. Her tone was calm, but her eyes burned with something Taraji could not read. They sat across from each other, the air filled with unspoken history. "You remind me of myself," Victoria said softly, a woman who had to claw her way through a world built to shut her out. Taraji frowned. "Why are you here?" Victoria leaned closer, placing a thin envelope on the table. "Because the truth is buried, and because you deserve to know what was taken from you." Taraji stared at the envelope. Fear, anger, hope, all collided at once. Victoria's hand rested on hers briefly, steady, firm. "Use it wisely. It will cost you everything, or give you everything." Before Taraji could respond, the older woman rose, leaving her with nothing but the envelope and a storm raging in her chest. Taraji's hands shook as she tore the envelope open. Documents spilled across the table. Dates, ledgers, sworn statements. And then, proof. Her father had not been guilty. The deals that placed him in chains were tied to James Boyd. Hidden accounts, secret payments, witnesses silenced. Every page screamed the truth she had begged for all her life. Her chest tightened. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth as tears slid freely. For years, she had carried shame like armor. For years, she believed her father's name was stained beyond repair. But here it was, light in the darkness. She whispered his name, her voice breaking. "Daddy." They lied. The pages blurred through her tears. Rage burned inside her, stronger than the grief. She rose, pacing the room, clutching the evidence to her chest. No more whispers, no more chains. This was justice. This was freedom. Yet, even as relief washed over her, dread crept in. To expose the truth meant war with the Empire. To step forward was to paint a target on her back. Taraji closed her eyes. For her father, she would risk everything. For herself, she had no choice. Carson sat across from his father in the grand study, shadows stretching long across the walls. James Boyd's voice thundered with command. You will end this foolishness. You will marry Phoenix, and you will not disgrace this family with her." Carson's jaw clenched. For years, he had obeyed. For years, he had carried the weight of a legacy he never asked for. But tonight, something inside him broke free. "No," he said, steady and firm. James froze, eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "I said no. I won't be your puppet. I won't sacrifice her to keep your empire intact." The silence cracked into fury. James rose, towering, fists clenched. "You ungrateful child. Everything you have is because of me." Carson stood too, taller than his father now. "Everything I have feels like chains. If that's the price of your empire, I don't want it." The air vibrated with anger. James's face twisted in rage. But Carson did not flinch. For the first time he had chosen his own side, and in that choice he knew there was no turning back. Taraji sat in a quiet cafe, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup. She had not expected Phoenix to walk in. Yet there she was, stripped of arrogance, eyes red, steps uncertain. "I need to talk," Phoenix whispered, sliding into the seat across from her. Taraji said nothing, her gaze sharp. Tears filled Phoenix's eyes. "It wasn't real. The pregnancy, the tests. I was forced." Her voice cracked. "James made me do it. He said if I refused, he would ruin me, ruin my family." Taraji's chest tightened. She wanted to hate her. She wanted to spit the truth back in her face, but the broken woman before her was no longer a queen. She was a pawn, discarded and desperate. "I thought I could live with the lie," Phoenix admitted, "but watching you suffer, it destroyed me too." Silence stretched between them, heavy and raw. For the first time, Taraji saw Phoenix not as a rival, but as another victim of the Empire's cruelty. "You should tell him yourself," Taraji said softly. Phoenix shook her head. "He already knows. He just won't forgive me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Redemption tasted bitter, but it was all she had left. The attack came without warning. Taraji was leaving the office late, her steps echoing in the garage. The lights flickered. A shadow moved. Then the strike. A figure lunged from the dark, blade glinting. Taraji gasped, stumbling back. Fear gripped her throat, but before the blade could fall, Carson was there. His body crashed into hers, knocking her to the ground as the knife cut through air. Chaos erupted. Shouts, the scrape of shoes against concrete. Carson wrestled the attacker, fury in every movement. The knife slashed his arm, crimson spilling across his sleeve. Taraji screamed his name, but her voice drowned in the fight. The attacker fled, leaving only silence and blood. Carson staggered, gripping his wound. Taraji rushed to him, her hands pressing against the bleeding. Tears blurred her sight. "Why?" she choked. He met her eyes, pain etched across his face. "Because I'd rather bleed than see you fall." Her chest broke with anguish. She held him tight, the warmth of his blood seeping into her skin. The Empire had declared war, and Carson had chosen his side with his own body. White light glared above them. Machines hummed. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Taraji sat beside Carson's bed, her hands clutching his. His arm was bandaged, his face pale, but his eyes never left hers. "You could have died," she whispered, voice breaking. "I would die," Carson said softly, "before I let them take you from me." Tears stung her eyes. She shook her head. "Don't say that. Don't." He pressed her hand harder, forcing her to look at him. From his pocket he pulled a small box, clumsy in his weakened grip. Her breath caught. "Taraji." His voice cracked, fragile yet firm. "Marry me. Not because of them. Not because of the war, but because I can't breathe knowing there's a chance I might lose you without you knowing I'm yours." The box opened. Inside, a simple ring gleamed. Nothing lavish, nothing expected of a billionaire, just a promise. Tears spilled down her face. She covered her mouth, shaking with emotion. Carson's hand trembled, waiting. And in that broken, sterile room, she whispered the only word her heart could hold. "Yes." The courtroom was full, cameras flashing, voices buzzing. James Boyd entered with pride, chin high, ready to crush anyone who stood against him. Then Victoria rose, calm, steady, in her hands a folder that carried the weight of decades. She placed it on the stand. Documents spread across the table, hidden accounts, altered testimonies, names tied to James's hand. Every lie, every cover-up exposed under the lights. Gasps filled the room. Journalists scribbled furiously. Screens lit up with breaking news. James's face turned white. His lips parted, but no defense came. "This family's wealth," Victoria said, her voice sharp and clear, "was built not only on ambition, but on the destruction of the innocent. My grandson will not carry a throne of lies." The room erupted. Reporters shouted. Lawyers scrambled. James staggered, his power crumbling before all eyes. Taraji sat in silence, her fists tight, tears slipping down her cheeks. This was not just evidence. This was her father's freedom. The Boyd Empire shook, and for the first time James Boyd stood not as a ruler, but as a man stripped bare before the world. The day her father walked free, the sun felt warmer than ever. Taraji stood outside the courthouse, the evidence of his innocence declared. Reporters swarmed, flashes blinding, but all she saw was him. Gray streaked his hair. Wrinkles carved his face, yet his back was straight, his eyes proud. For years he had borne the shame of a crime he never committed. For years he had carried silence so his daughter could walk taller. And now, at last, the weight was gone. Taraji ran into his arms. He held her tight, as though refusing to let go. Tears streamed down her face. "They know the truth now. Everyone knows." Her father's voice was hoarse but strong. "I told you, baby. They could break my body, but not the truth." The cameras captured every moment, but none of it mattered. For Taraji, the world disappeared. It was only her father's embrace, the smell of freedom in the air, and the knowledge that justice, long denied, had finally spoken. It was not victory of money, not power, but of dignity reclaimed. And in that moment, the family once branded in shame lifted their heads without fear. No cathedral, no chandeliers, no diamond crowns. The wedding took place in a small garden, flowers blooming quietly around them. Friends gathered in simple clothes, no flashing cameras, no gilded invitations. Taraji wore a plain white dress, elegant yet modest. Carson stood beside her, his suit dark, his eyes steady. They exchanged vows not of empire, but of love. "I promise," he whispered, sliding the ring onto her hand, "to fight beside you, not above you." Tears glistened in her eyes. She answered, voice trembling, "I promise to love you, not the power you carry, but the man who chose me." Applause rose softly, honest and unpolished. No spectacle was needed. Taraji's father sat in the front row, pride radiating from his smile. Victoria watched with calm approval, her head held high. Even Phoenix, far in the crowd, lowered her gaze, silent but present. The kiss sealed not just a union, but a rebellion. Against lies, against oppression, against the belief that love was not enough. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, the modest garden held a truth grander than any palace. Love did not need gold to shine. The boardroom was silent when Victoria stood. Age had not softened her. Her voice carried authority that silenced even the proudest voices. "My time is over," she declared. "The empire must be rebuilt on truth, not deceit. Today, I hand it to my grandson." Carson stepped forward, Taraji at his side. Some whispered in shock. Others protested, but the evidence was undeniable. James Boyd's reign had ended in disgrace. Carson's gaze swept across the room. "This empire will no longer thrive on fear. We will not build our future on the backs of the innocent. If that is weakness, then I welcome it." Murmurs rippled, but no one could defy him now. He was not only the heir, he was the man who had bled for the truth, the man who had chosen love over legacy. Taraji stood tall beside him. The same woman they once mocked now shared the helm of one of the most powerful families in America. It was not money that defined them now, not the name, but the promise that the new empire would be built on justice, on dignity, on something no scandal could destroy. The Boyd Empire had been reborn. Weeks passed in fragile calm. The empire stood on new ground, though shadows still lingered. Taraji woke one morning with a quiet certainty. A hand rested on her stomach, and a smile touched her lips. The doctor's words confirmed what her heart already knew. She was carrying life. When she told Carson, silence struck first. Then tears welled in his eyes. He pulled her close, holding her as if afraid she might vanish. "A child," he whispered, voice breaking. "Our child." Hope lit the room. For Taraji, it was more than motherhood. It was proof that her father's suffering had not been the end of their story. This child would be born free of shame, free of chains, free of lies. The news spread quietly through the family. Victoria smiled, her old eyes softening with pride. For the first time in years, the future felt bright. Taraji placed her hand on her belly, whispering a promise only the unborn could hear. "You will never know the darkness I carried. You will grow in light." Life, once stolen, had returned. And in that fragile heartbeat, hope took root for generations yet to come. Far from the light, James Boyd sat in silence. The mansion that once echoed with power now rang hollow. No boardroom awaited his commands. No allies returned his calls. He poured a drink with shaking hands, but the glass clattered against the table. His reflection stared back from the window. Older, smaller, stripped. Once he had ruled everything: money, contracts, reputations. He had silenced voices with a word. Now his name carried only disgrace. Images haunted him. The courtroom, Victoria's defiance, Carson's rebellion, Taraji's unbroken gaze, each one cut deeper than the last. He muttered to himself, bitterness thick. "I built an empire. I gave them everything." But the silence answered. An empire built on lies could never last. Outside, life moved on. Inside, James withered in isolation. Irony weighed heavy. The man who had destroyed families, now abandoned by his own. He sank into his chair, shadows swallowing him whole. There was no empire left to protect him, only a legacy of ashes. Phoenix packed her bags in quiet resolve. No servants bustled around her. No cameras waited outside. For the first time in her life, she was alone by choice. The mirror reflected not the polished fiancée of a billionaire, but a woman tired of lies. She traced the rim of a glass with her finger, remembering the cruelty in James's orders, the shame in her false pregnancy. She had played her part, and the empire had nearly broken her. But Taraji's strength had revealed something Phoenix had never known. Courage could exist without wealth. She closed the last suitcase, her movements steady. At the station, she bought a single ticket. No destination planned, just distance. As the train pulled away, she looked out the window. For once, she did not see herself as a queen discarded. She saw a woman free to choose. Phoenix exhaled, the weight slipping from her chest. Redemption was not loud. It was not celebrated. It was the quiet act of walking away. The family gathered in the small house that had once felt too empty. Now it was full. Laughter mixed with the smell of food, with the sound of stories told again. Taraji sat beside her father, her hand resting on his. His skin was rough, his voice still deep, though age had worn him. For years he had carried sorrow in his eyes. That night, when he looked at his daughter, that sorrow was gone. He smiled. It was not wide, not loud, but it was real. The smile of a man no longer burdened by shame. The smile of a father seeing his child free, his name restored. Tears filled Taraji's eyes. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. Around them, family and love wrapped tight, stronger than any empire. In that moment, wealth meant nothing. Titles meant nothing. Only this: dignity returned, love unbroken, hope alive. It was the ending she had prayed for, and the beginning she had earned. The story had begun with chains. A father wrongly condemned. A daughter forced to prove her worth in a world eager to dismiss her. It had risen through storms, lies, betrayals, power games that sought to break her, and yet, in the end, love and truth had prevailed. Taraji's journey was not just about a woman and a man. It was about justice restored. It was about a black woman who refused to bow, who carried her father's name until the world was forced to see the truth. She proved that no fortune, no title, no empire could bury dignity forever. The Boyd Empire had crumbled, but from its ruins, a new legacy was born, one built not on fear, but on love. This story is a reminder. Money fades, power fails, but justice and love endure. If you believe every woman deserves to be seen, every truth deserves to be heard, share this story. Let others feel its strength. And if you want to walk with us through more journeys of courage and love, subscribe and stay with us. Because stories like this are not just tales. They are mirrors of the fight for respect, for freedom, for life itself.